friends on the West Coast, and good afternoon on the East Coast. I'm Dr. Karen Philbrick, the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University, and I'd like to welcome you to today's MTI Research Snaps webinar. So we lead two competitively selected university transportation centers. The first, funded through the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, better known as California Senate Bill 1. We unify and focus the surface transportation research and workforce development efforts of the 23 CSU campuses. Additionally, we also lead a university transportation center funded through the U.S. Department of Transportation, referred to as the Mineta Consortium for Transportation Mobility. We have partners at Howard University, Navajo Tech, and the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. Across all of our work, our focus is to improve the mobility of people and goods by improving the safety, efficiency, and accessibility of our nation's system. During today's webinar, if you have any questions, we invite you to submit them through the chat feature or the Q&A feature. We are recording this webinar, and the link to view it will be available a little bit later this afternoon. It will also be published to our website and promoted through our social media channels. Now, on to the good stuff. Today's webinar explores techniques to create exciting virtual events to keep your online community engaged. By learning about the differences between in-person and digital events, we can overcome Zoom fatigue, a very real thing, and keep moving forward with transportation innovation. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I definitely experience Zoom fatigue and am literally in back-to-back meetings. So I'm excited to learn techniques about how to remain engaged and enthusiastic. So please join me in welcoming today's presenter, Ms. Paige Malott. She is co-founder of Cascadia Rail and a digital communications expert. She's based in Seattle, and for over 15 years, she's developed and executed strategic social storytelling and virtual events for a range of clients, and that includes our friends at APTA, as well as at Amazon and the city of Seattle itself. Paige is also an online learning facilitator at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and with a focus on social media engagement and executive education. Paige, we need you. Go for it. Give us some techniques on how we can deliver better, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Karen, and I'm glad to be here. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Paige Malott, and I am here to talk to you about digital butts and seats. If you haven't had a chance to connect on social, jot down our links here at Paige Malott for LinkedIn and at Train Explainer on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Now, if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this talk today, it's that the mind can only absorb what the butt can endure. A little bit about me. I've spent 15 years working in social media strategy, and I started my career in live television way back in the day before there was YouTube. Now, today we're going to share some of those tips and tricks that I learned in that industry to help make your presentations better. As Karen mentioned, I also work for MIT. I teach a class there on social media strategy, and I'm also the chair of Cascadia Rail, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to bringing high-speed rail to the Pacific Northwest. Now we'll start today with a question. How long do you think your online attention span is? I'll give you a minute to drop an answer into the chat box. Would you believe that the average attention span is only about 12 minutes? Now think about the types of programming that you consume. TV shows, they have commercials about every 8 to 10 minutes. A TED Talk runs about 12 to 14 minutes in length. And a YouTube video averages around only 11 minutes an episode. And why is that? Well, it's because of social media. Social media has really driven down the attention span and the amount of time that we're able to consume content and stay interested. In fact, it takes only about 3 seconds to get a first impression made on social, with the most effective videos lasting around 24 to 90 seconds. Now, if you're on a computer, you're only spending about 2.5 seconds per piece of content that you engage with. And if you're on a phone, that's only 1.5 seconds. Now, you're probably feeling a little bit like this. That's okay. Let's take a look further at why all this is. If we're learning about YouTube, YouTube has 30,000 hours of newly produced videos uploaded each hour. That's over 82 years of video every single day. With the average person being online for about 2.5 hours each day, your online event is competing with all of this content in what we like to call the attention economy. Now, by now, you're probably feeling more like this. And that's okay, because we're going to talk about ways to make your online event interesting and successful. The first thing to keep in mind is that online events are not the same as in-person conferences. This is something that a lot of people struggled with when the pandemic came, because we just moved everything from being in person to online like it was a one-to-one transition. And that didn't really work out because online events are different than what you would have in person. So formats that don't really fit an online platform include having a week-long conference, having an 8-hour-long, day-long conference, or having start times on the East Coast that are at 8 in the morning, which excludes your audiences on the West Coast because that means they have to wake up at 5 in the morning to attend your virtual event. We also have to be mindful of time zones. So if you have presenters that are in Europe or Asia, it might be the middle of the night there when your conference is happening. Same thing if your audience is from those areas too. So all of these things we have to keep in mind when we're planning an online event. One way to think about the content that you're planning is to plan it out kind of like a TV guide. And one of the reasons why TV guides were so successful back in the day was because they clustered similar groups of programming together. So if you look back, you know that on weeknights from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., you could often find Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. You know, tune in at 7 p.m., Wheel of Fortune's on, followed by 7:30, Jeopardy's on regularly. You also have the same time block, Newlyweds in the dating game, or you can also tune in to the Judge Judy and People's Court show as well. Monday Night Football is also a great example. You know that every night on Monday at 8 p.m., you're going to have a football game on. Or if you're like me and are interested in the primetime television, 8 p.m. on Mondays kicks off my favorite episode, ALF. So as mentioned, you'll want to create theme topics grouped together and then batch those together in certain time blocks so that people know how to tune into your content. You'll want to limit your Zoom programming to be about 1 hour in length and limit each one of those presentations within that hour time block to be about 10 minutes per speaker. So an example of having 1 hour of Zoom programming would include having 40 minutes of presentations, 4 presenters speaking for 10 minutes each, 10 minutes of live Q&A, and then an extra 10 minutes of what we call buffer time. And this allows for any kind of runovers or technical issues to be mitigated and to give people a little break in between the different programs. The most important thing to remember is that digital communications is most effective when it's consistent over time rather than outputting it all at once. So for example, instead of having an 8-hour day of Zoom events, you should try having 1 hour per week of Zoom events over the course of 2 months and allow people to come back, revisit, and tune into that programming over a consistent period of time. One way to do this is by pre-recording. You can record a presentation in advance of your event, which allows you to polish it up and edit out any mistakes. And it also helps keep your speakers within that 10-minute time limit. This gives you a presentation contingency for broadcast day. So for example, if a speaker gets sick or has an emergency and can't show up, the recording has already happened and you can just put it on the air, put it on your Zoom call, and have it ready to go. Having a recorded video also allows it to be recycled later. So if you're having a social media campaign or a newsletter campaign, you can include this video in those marketing techniques as well. And you can still have your presenter available for live Q&A while the recording is being broadcast. It's also important to know your audience. So you might think to yourself, okay, who do we have that's going to attend our talks? Is it going to be a subject matter expert, such as an engineer? Is it somebody who wants to have a lot of detail, a lot of technical knowledge about the subject that you're presenting? Or is your audience more of a generalist audience? Are these decision makers, legislators, business leadership, or the general public? Are these people that are looking for some nuggets of information that they can take back to their teams, their families, to talk about whatever it is that you're presenting, and have some like digestible, memorable bits to share with them to get them on board with your cause as well. Once you identify your audience, you want to talk about how do you want the audience to approach your event? What do you want the takeaway to be? What do you want them to learn? And who on your team is the best person to deliver this information in a concise and an engaging way? It should be like meeting with a friend to talk over a cup of coffee. What you don't want to do is to present to your audience a subject that you're just interested in talking about. So when you come to your audience and they don't really have a full understanding or share that same passion about that subject matter, you're probably going to lose them along the way, and you might come off as rambling or confusing. Similar to when Grandpa Simpson tells a story about tying an onion to his belt, and it's really kind of hard to follow. And also, for any of your Simpsons fans out there, you want to drop a comment in the chat box if you know why Grandpa Simpson tied an onion to his belt. If you're not sure what your audience is interested in, you'll want to create an audience survey, and you can do this by using a Google form. This is a pretty simple technique that you can do. If you know how to use Word, you can set up a Google form, and it's also free to use as well. So create a survey, learn what your audience is interested in and what they want to hear from you. Another thing that we do is we create information that is more than just for an American audience. So with Cascadia Rail, we're often presenting to a Canadian audience in addition to Americans. And we need to be mindful of different terminology and different statistics that we need to include to be more inclusive of a broader audience. So for example, one of the things we ran into is what word do we use if we're talking about the geography? North American, it shouldn't come to us as a surprise. North American was more preferred by Canadians to be inclusive of the geography. So some other tips and tricks that we can use as well is to remember to add the metric system into your presentations so that people are getting both, both your American statistics and also your Canadian statistics, and anything that comes up is the metric system as well, and being considerate of time zones so that people that are in Europe, they can do the presentations. And losing my voice here. It's important to have water on hand as well to do, take a little sip, take a little breath. So as we were talking about, the word American was not inclusive of the Canadian audiences, so we wanted to use the word North American instead. So when we're choosing our presenters, we want to think about who we're talking to. So are we having people that are looking for technical information, such as subject matter experts? And are those folks coming from a background where they're wanting to do a deep dive into the topic matter? Or do you want to be somebody who is receiving general information, people that need to be having top level information to take those digestible conversations back to their families? And that's somebody who's an edutainer, similar to Lyle Landley with The Simpsons. Now, an edutainer is somebody who can really drum up a crowd and really cause some celebration here, get people interested and engaged with your event. And they can also talk about things on a top level. So, for example, very simplifying terminology and really kind of talk about a conversation in a way that's going to make it easy to understand for everyone. And they're really great for presenting to legislators or decision makers or the public. Virtual events allow you the flexibility to showcase talented subject matter experts at your company. So folks that may not have gotten a chance to present before at in-person conferences are a great opportunity to have them online for your digital conference. So you want to look beyond your CEOs, and you also want to amplify the voices of underrepresented talent that may have been overlooked before to speak about different topics. So how do you identify these people? You want to ask yourself, who on your team could talk about this subject conversationally? Who is somebody who might be a junior level employee who really knows their stuff that would be a great presenter? And is there a Black, Indigenous person of color, a woman, a non-binary person, or an LGBTQ subject matter expert on your team that could deliver a great talk and that you could mentor into becoming a great speaker? One of my favorite quotes is, "We cannot be what we cannot see." And this is a great opportunity to bring more of those voices into the forefront of our conversations. Now, creating content. You've got your presenters picked out, you understand your audience. How do you create a great talk? So you want to come up with some image-heavy presentations. Limit the amount of text that you have on your slides. You want to have infographics, maps, photographs, any kind of visual aid that you can have to help people better understand. You'll want somebody who can speak in a conversation style, help people really be able to reiterate some of these fun facts and fun tidbits that you're sharing with them. And you'll also want to apply a marketing technique called the laugh, think, cry method. Now, the laugh, think, cry method means that you have 2 of the 3 things that are met. If you don't meet these criteria, you need to go back and start over. Are you making your audience laugh? Are you making them think and consider a bullet point that you're talking about? Or are you generating a genuine emotion like crying or empathy? If it doesn't pass this test, if it doesn't meet 2 out of these 3 criteria, back to the drawing board. You need to find some way to engage your audiences. Once you have your content developed, you need to become proficient at presenting. So for example, if you work at a large company, you probably have a PR team that provides media training. And these folks can coach you through the best practices and what are things that are great to say or not so great to say when you're representing the company. When you're doing your practice talks, you can practice speaking on camera similar to a TED Talk style. You can look up presenters that are interesting for you to listen to and try to emulate that style of speech. And also just do a recording and watch yourself back and see what you like and what you don't like about the way that you present. You can practice in a small group online and listen to constructive, honest feedback from your peers. And especially if you're presenting to a general audience, you can practice with your family and friends. Ask them, did they understand what the topic was about? Were they curious? Were they bored? What are things that you can do to improve for people that may not be as familiar with this material as you are? Now, we've all probably met somebody on one of our Zoom calls who has been in the witness protection program. And you've probably learned that there are a lot more of your colleagues that are in the witness protection program than you originally thought. And this comes from bad lighting. One of the ways that we can fix this is by a simple device called a ring light. And you can order this on Amazon. It costs about 15 bucks. And it's a USB rechargeable light that you can set in different settings for intensity as well. So this should help with any kind of shadows or any kind of bad lighting that you're having when you're giving a presentation. Now, in addition to the person in the witness protection program, we have a couple of other usual suspects as well, such as the levitating head, the close talker, and the person who's multitasking and perpetually off screen. One of the ways we can fix this is to properly center yourself when you're giving a talk. You want to give enough headroom and enough room on either side of you so that you have enough room to move around and that you're centered and properly focused on screen. You'll also want to have enough room on the bottom half of the screen too for gestures, so it doesn't make it seem like you're too close and up in people's business. Just how you would normally talk to somebody in person. When we're looking at technology, what technology we need to use, you want to choose one platform for your organization. This is going to help simplify what people need to learn in order to have a smooth and coherent presentation. And also, it will help you learn different features that you can use as well. So I prefer to use Zoom. It's one that you can have the most control over. You have a lot of options and different features with it as well. You also need to train a couple of people to be a tech team who operate the behind the scenes part of the Zoom presentations. So one of the things why you want to have multiple people for this is just in case somebody gets sick or there's an issue, you have someone who's backed up and ready to help out on call. If you have a really big event, something that's important that can't be messed up or can't have any errors, you want to outsource that event to an event production company. They can really dedicate people, they do these things on the regular, and they can really dedicate resources to making it seem polished and flawless event. And you also want to ensure that your presenters and that your tech team are all proficient in operating the technology before you begin. Once you have everything ready to go, your presentation's ready to go, your people are coached, your content is excellent, you want to promote your event. And best practices for promoting your event include starting 2 weeks in advance, setting out invitations, also sending reminders at the 1 week and 48-hour mark. And then also you want to have a catchy title and description in your email header. So how many of you saw the words digital butts and seats, had to click on that? I know there was a bunch of you because we had over 140 registrations. I believe today we were up to 160 registrations, which was fantastic. And thank you all for joining us. I'm happy to have you here. But yes, we had a fantastic response to that. And that's because when people look at their inbox, they're not expecting to see the word butts and seats, right? So you want to have something that's catchy, that's fun and lighthearted to get people to click on that and learn more about your event. People remember the majority of your message when it's shared in a video rather than when it's put into text or sent via email. So how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as somebody who gave an engaging, exciting online talk that really rallied people around your cause, or not? Any questions?
I am coming off of with my own little technological difficulties there, Paige. That was just, I don't know if I'm centered correctly or if I'm too close, but I'm certainly going to put some of those tips to good use. So I appreciate that. So a couple of things. Somebody said, great presentation. Is 2 weeks in advance enough notice for the initial invite for a virtual webinar?
The minimum should be at least 2 weeks. If you have time to plan for more than that, absolutely. Most people start tuning in, looking for planning out their schedule up to a month in advance. But we do tend to see most of the movement around that 2 week mark, 2 weeks and in.
You know, we actually experience that ourselves when we do our outreach for these webinar snaps. We notice that the bulk of registrants come within a week of the event or even within 2 days prior to the event. So that's very helpful. Question for you, Paige. What are some common ways that presenters in virtual events lose their audience?
So oftentimes people can lose their audience because they have too much text on slide or they're reading directly from the slides. That's one of the most common mistakes that I see. So people can read the slides as you go. They're coming to the talk to hear you talk. So you want to prepare some remarks that are different from what's presented directly on the presentation. Also, you need to consider, does this need to be a talk, or is it something that could be sent out in a different type of medium? If it's something where there does require a lot of words to understand, it might be better to try and find a supplemental way to do that. Also, some different tips and tricks would be making sure that you have a lot of engaging content, that you're going back and forth with audience to make sure that you're hearing what they want to hear in addition to what you want to share with them.
Thank you. And what are your tips for being an engaging host of an online event?
To be an engaging host, I would say the #1 tip is to smile while you're talking, and that can just create different inflections in your voice. And so it's a natural, I think it's like a natural tip that your body reacts to. So I think that's the #1 thing to do. But also practice, practice, practice. Watch yourself back and say, would I be interested in watching myself give this talk? Where can I add in some more jokes and some more humor? Where can I come across as more natural and authentic in this presentation?
I did notice that when you would punctuate what you said with little jokes, it really got my attention and I would laugh and have a response. So I appreciated that. So one of our professors, hi David, from San Jose State University, posted a question saying he teaches students and fills the dead time before class starts with a music video. Any thoughts on that as a technique for warming up the audience?
So that's fantastic. I actually had a professor back in the day that did the same thing when we were coming to in-person class. And it was something, I still remember that to this day as something cool that he did as like a warm-up music to get people excited to arrive. So I think that that's an excellent option, an idea that you've done there to warm up the class. And if you can do that with different themes that you're teaching for the day, or finding relevant memes as well is also a big hit to touch on current events. Students love that. So keep it up. I think that that's a fantastic idea.
And so to your follow-on question, David, the answer is yes. Intersperse short videos through your presentation, break it up with the infographics, kind of make it a little more exciting and to keep people's attention. Absolutely. Paige, somebody posed the question about how many people actually attend online events. noting that people often register, but then don't show up. What is kind of the standard or expectation for virtual events?
So it all depends on when you start marketing your event, who you're marketing it to, and as far as you know, what is the lead time that you've marketed your event. So if you have people that you're targeting that should be specifically interested in this topic, you're going to have a better turnout or a better expectation of turnout. A rule of thumb, and this was pre-pandemic, a rule of thumb was a 10% turnout of the people that register.
Well,
and if you do, right,
did you say 10%?
correct, 10% was, but if you're doing better than that, that's fantastic. And that's a very, I would say that's a very low expectation to have, but that was a benchmark previously. So of course, when you're looking at who else needs to come, you know, who else are you marketing to, the more specific targeting you can do, the better your results are going to be.
So that's interesting, because I've noticed for our Research Snap series, of which this is one of the features, that it's about half actually log in the day of. So was that 10% figure based on pre-COVID expectations or our pandemic world expectations?
That was the pre-pandemic expectations, was the 10%.
Yeah, that's
so
important.
It is, yes. And so, yeah, so the 50% login rate is more on par for what we're experiencing for folks all working from home. But keep in mind, as folks are going to start transitioning back to work too, that might change as we have people that are in different settings as we come out of the pandemic here. So anywhere between 10 and 50% is a realistic expectation.
That is incredibly helpful to hear. So thank you for that. From our guest, Micah, what are your tips for online conferences? Specifically, oh, this is a good question. Networking seems more effective when done in person. I agree. While this clearly is a limitation in online networking, what platforms have the strength for facilitating that? What are your techniques for allowing us to remain engaged in this virtual environment?
So the question is, what are platforms that have more robust features, and how can we remain engaged? Like, what are some ways that we can hone in on that networking? I really like being able to connect with people through LinkedIn as well. So it's being able to find through social media sites that are connected to perhaps the follow-up of your talks and of your presentations, being able to connect with them afterwards about that content. And so you can kind of follow along with the participation through registrations and social media promotion online about who's going. And then you can have those more one-to-one connections, and you can read up about what their background is on LinkedIn. It's been a bit tricky to find the right feel for networking online. And this is something that I've navigated as well with online teaching, is how do you engage people in discussion forums, and how do you engage people remotely? Because part of that is really having that face-to-face interaction and being able to pick up on nuances and things like that. So it's been a little tricky to be able to do that in conferences, but there's places like there's an app called House Party, which I like to use, which is kind of a supplement to the Zoom calls, but it allows you to do more different games and things like that online with the people that you're meeting. So there's an actual activity to do versus just having a chat back and forth.
Well, that does sound engaging, because I know from my experience of being at multiple events and my background that obviously we have different personality styles. Some are introverts, some are extroverts, some derive energy from that interaction. So being able to provide opportunities to engage all is critically important. I'm going to have to check out that House Party. Let's get on to our next question here. Can you elaborate on the laugh, think, and cry for those of us who miss the comedy circuit?
Yes, so laugh, think, cry is a technique that's used in marketing to basically weigh the effectiveness of your content. So you want to say, are there two or more of those aspects of laugh, think, or cry that your content meets? Are you amusing your audience? Are you educating your audience about something? or are you creating a genuine emotion, such as empathy or sadness? And what that means is, in the psychology of marketing, people are more able to relate to your product, relate to what you're trying to tell them if they have a feeling attached to it. And we can kind of think back to TV commercials as a good example of this. So for example, we'll say the Super Bowl commercial with the Doritos ad is one where there's the cowboy and his mustache is dancing. And then we've also got the other cowboy who wrote the song that's playing in the background. And you know, that's something that kind of created a memory for that advertisement based on something that was funny and unexpected. So that's one of the tips and tricks of marketing there. Same thing for learning. If we're talking about complex information, creating a genuine emotion, such as telling an empathetic story, having some humility behind the story as well, can cause people to remember that or empathize with the speaker, or you can do that through humor. So as long as you're kind of integrating one of those two things to create an emotion, you're going to be able to help people understand the topic content better.
Interesting. So they'll be more connected to the information. There will be more zones activated, if you will, if you're motivating that emotional response to the information that you're presenting.
Yes, that's correct.
That's very interesting. Welcome, Persephone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. Our next question: when should you use presentation style, like today, versus including all participants so that they're visible, more like in a meeting setting?
So presentation style, like today, is if you're broadcasting to a large audience and you're wanting to have more control over how your presentation works. So if it's something where you're not looking for a lot of input throughout the discussion, and you want to have the Q&A and the discussion at the end, that's something to use more of this particular style if you're trying to cover a lot of information or several presenters worth of information all at once. If you're having a more casual meeting, such as if you're having a team meeting with work and you're looking to do more collaborative things, that's more of an idea to use for the other features.
That makes perfect sense. And so our guest, Brian, has said he has an event that has to be 4 hours. How often would you recommend a break in action? No, I did hear you say that if you have presenters, you want to do the 10-minute presentations max, and then leave that 10-minute buffer also for technology issues, bio breaks, what have you, and 10 minutes Q&A. Is that kind of the gold standard, or what would you recommend for a 4-hour engagement?
So for a 4-hour engagement, I would try and chunk that out into the 1-hour time block. So having 40 minutes of presentations, 10 minutes for Q&A, and then 10 minutes for bio break and set up for your next event, and then repeat for the second hour. So that way you have enough information coming out from your presenters. And you can always have a little more leeway with the Q&A too. So it's up to you to decide how much you want the audience to be able to ask questions versus how big of a break you need to give people. Typically 10 minutes is a good rule of thumb because it allows people to do what they need to do and have a breather, grab a snack, etc. But it's enough time for them to have to come back to the computer. So what you don't want to do is create a big enough gap where they get occupied and start doing something else and forget to come back to the conference. So that's a tip that I would give for that. But I would also suggest, find ways where you can kind of whittle down the content and say, does this need to be part of a live event, or is this something that a different form of marketing media could do as well?
That's interesting because you sparked a thought for me of something you said during your presentation, which I thought was engaging. You posed a question and said, drop your answer into the chat feature. You did it with how long do you think person can remain focused and engaged? And also, I don't know if you saw this, did you say it was an onion attached to grandpa's belt? Somebody
Yes.
knew the answer. It was the style at the time.
So it was the style at the time. Right. That's correct.
But moving right along, our guest Diana has a question specifically, and I'm going to read it. Can you say more about the 10 presentations? How can we get presenters to adopt this format instead of the 30 segments? Also, ways to engage audience.
So repeat that question to me again. So is this regarding the 10-minute time frame that the presenters need to stay within?
think so. Diana, if you could drop a clarifier into the chat, but I maybe the 10 presentations was referring to 10 minutes.
Okay,
Let me see here. Yes, 10 minutes. She wants to know about
excellent.
the 10 minutes.
So some tips about how do you get your speakers to fit into this structure. You need to be very clear with your instructions to the speakers when you're meeting with them before the presentation. So telling them up front, you're creating a PowerPoint presentation that's 10 minutes in length, that needs to be visual heavy and have minimal text. And you need to tell them this in very concise bullet point language is what I've found to be most effective. And you also are responsible as the coordinator to ensure people are staying within that structure as well. So don't be afraid to give constructive feedback and tell people, oh, we need you to fix this or that because it needs to fit within this time frame. So just be very clear up front with what you need them to do and offer kind and constructive feedback along the way.
I think that's such a good point. And I know that prior to our virtual engagements, when I would be on events in person, some of the more powerful roles I think are that of moderator and session leader, because if you lose control of time, you lose control of the event. And so that's a great tip. That's a great tip, Paige. Thank you for that. So here's a question. Do you find that the technical audiences, for example, engineers, generally have a different and longer attention span than the general public? Or do those attention span rules that you shared at the beginning hold true for across the board?
Ooh, that's a great question.
That's a good one.
That is an excellent question. And I will say it depends on the audience. But what I have learned is that unless you have a small working group of, let's say, 10 people or a small group that's very interested in the specific information you're communicating, most people who are even in technical audiences are still going to have that attention span. So they're not going to have a longer attention span just because they're more what we call like a data-oriented mind. We're still going to get bored and still going to need those moments of laughter or moments of empathetic storytelling when you're hearing the information. We're human. We're all human, and we need things to keep us engaged. So I would say that if you're looking for people to be more involved in something very specific and technical, keep your group small. If you are talking to a larger technical audience, so let's say an engineering conference with 100 people or 200 people in the room, you'll still want to apply these tips and tricks so that you're keeping everyone interested of all skill levels that are attending.
That's excellent. That was a good question. So this reminds me that one of our guests, Kevin Holliday, popped a tip into the chat feature that he uses. And he thought one of your great tips, Paige, was to smile during your talk to keep people engaged. And he said he likes to watch a bit of stand-up comedy or read something funny before he goes on because it helps him smile during the presentation. So just a tip from one of our other guests to the rest of the audience. Alex has posed a question. Hi, Alex. Do you have thoughts on how you should dress for a presentation?
Yes,
or an event specifically.
So for attire, you'll want to wear a solid jewel-toned shirt. And you should also wear one with sleeves, as we can see here. So I picked out red. My colors are usually red or blue. And why this is that it makes you stand out. It makes you pop. And it doesn't have any kind of distractions going on as far as patterns or scarves or things like that. If you're someone who wears jewelry like necklaces and whatnot, that can cause some sound to pick up in your microphone. So try not to wear jewelry when you're presenting. Earrings are fine. I do stud earrings, but I don't do dangly earrings because it might interfere with my microphone. So yes, so I'd say like make sure you're kind of planning for accessorizing there. Makeup is another thing I would recommend, and this is for all genders. I would recommend putting on a little bit of makeup to help your features pop, and that's something simple, just for like some blush, maybe a little lip coloring, and a little bit of mascara or even eyeliner. Folks on the news do this all the time, and it helps bring out your features because they can sometimes get washed out when you're on camera. On camera doesn't pick up as well as the in-person features.
Apparently, I should have listened to this talk before I dressed to moderate this event. So everybody excuse me, we all have something to learn today. But thanks for that feedback, Paige. I think that's very important. And it does show your background in TV, I think. So Pam has a question here, and we do have 3 minutes left together today. And that is, what are the interactive features that can be included to keep the audience engaged?
Some interactive features, I would say, in addition to what you can use as far as additions onto Zoom, you can search to see if there's any add-ons for that if you know, that fits into your talks. But I like to come up with content that I'm creating to have the back and forth with audience. So is that going to be a pop culture joke? Is it going to be a quiz about the content? Things that people can participate in, such as polls. There's also options where you can take a poll at the end or during your presentation and then show those results to the audience. And that's always a fun one to do as well. You can collect that data privately, or you can have it publicly once the poll responses close, and people can follow up with that. So it all just depends on the style and the length of content that you're trying to prepare.
Okay, that's helpful. And about 20 minutes ago, our friend Karen Alexander wanted to know why you suggested Google Forms rather than Zoom polls. And does that relate to the question you just answered?
So regarding Google Forms was to create an audience survey, and this would go out prior to your event. So the Zoom poll is something that you could use in your event, whereas the Google form is something where you can collect data, and those results are produced in a spreadsheet, and they're also available as infographics as part of the Google form integration. So if you're needing to show this data to your team or to your supervisor and say, this is what our audience is interested in, it gives some great visuals there that make it easy for folks to take a glance and understand. So that's why I'd recommend Google Forms for data collection, and then the Zoom poll for in video dialogues.
Perfect. Well, this brings us to our last question here, which is, this company does not have a PR team. So what are some of your tips to improve public speaking, to help prep those first-time speakers, or to help our colleagues who maybe aren't as comfortable develop those techniques?
So if you're looking for assistance in practicing, you can reach out to folks like myself who do coaching and consulting for speaking. And you can also practice online. So what I like to do is looking at TED Talk videos of presenters that I enjoy listening to and emulating some of the talking points and inflections and body motions that they integrate into their presentations. And then I'll record myself back, practice back and forth, and see what I need to tweak. So you're kind of your own coach, your own PR team. One of the tips that I like to give folks is to prepare your statements ahead of time, to write out what you'd like to say, but don't read directly off your notes. So you should be able to walk through your slides and practice that dialogue, but not become dependent on reading off of them or reading off of a sheet of paper. It just helps you get your thoughts organized and clarify. And you can practice the smiling as well, and just make sure everything's polished. Practice with your friends. Just practice, practice, practice.
You know, that's a good tip too, because it's painful enough during in-person events when someone reads their presentation, but it's compounded when it's like this in front of the video screen. So I appreciate that. I'm very mindful it's 10:45, but we have one last question that I think is really important. So I'm going to ask it. What background provides the most professional look, and what are your thoughts on encouraging attendees to turn on their cameras?
So for the best professional looking background, I like to use a natural background here. And when I talk a lot with my hands, if you're using the green screen or any of the filters, sometimes your hands or your hair will disappear. So I tend to like to use just a clean room background. But I also think that bookshelves are a great complement as well, just like what Karen's using.
Oh, good, I did it right.
Just clean lines. You also want to kind of look to make sure that there's, everything is organized in the background as well. What I was saying not to do, I've seen people buy a backdrop from Amazon, which is like a sheet that you hang up in the back of your your office like a curtain, but it looks like a fake bookshelf. And that's weird because when you have creases in the spines of your books, that just looks kind of funny. So anything natural looking, or if you want to have a slide that has the name of your organization and just a very subtle brown down in the corner of the screen, I think that works well as well. So anything like that for presentations would be my top 3 recommendations. And then what was the second half of that question?
And then the second half of that question, well, it was actually a separate question, but I thought it was worth noting, was what are your thoughts on encouraging people to turn on their cameras?
Ask them directly.
That's a tough one.
It's hard. It's absolutely hard. So I would say to give people encouragement to turn them on and say, today we'd like to have people turn on, participate, even if it's just for the first 10 minutes of this meeting, to be able to see everyone and log on. Give them a heads up too. A lot of times when people are leaving their cameras off, it could be because there's something going on in the background, or maybe they're mobile for that day. But if you need them to be on screen, ask them directly, but also don't worry about it. Like, folks don't need to be on screen all the time. So unless you're presenting, unless you're the person that's the one who's being featured, folks should feel free to be flexible and to listen in the background as well. That's one of the benefits and the beauties of Zoom calls and digital communications. You can really log in from anywhere and enjoy these talks.
You made an interesting point there. I guess for me personally, I'm always worried about turning off the camera because I think that implies to others that I'm disengaged. Like, what am I doing behind the scenes? Am I multitasking? Am I actually listening? And so you saying to give yourself permission to have those breaks, I think that's an important lesson, at least for me to hear, because I am like this all the time. I don't want to look away. I don't want people to think I'm not paying attention. So thank you for those tips about how to keep ourselves engaged, how to keep our audiences engaged, and how to combat Zoom fatigue. Really important. Love the lessons learned. Love the digital butts and seats title. And so with that, our time has come to a close. And I'd like to thank Paige again for so generously giving of her expertise. I know I'm going to change clothes and implement a few different things myself after these lessons. And to our attendees, we invite you to join us to our next Research Snap. Will AVs do away with traffic fines and fees? And that will be hosted on April 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific. Once again, the video from today, as well as the presentation slides, will be available on our website and promoted through our social media channels. Thank you all for joining us. Stay safe, and we hope to see you soon.